Hello students, in this module we will be doing your chapter 9, the Mughal Empire. This is all the parts of medieval India and we are moving on to the C part, and that is the Mughal Empire. We will do a quick introduction of the chapter, and then we'll move on to the main kings of the Mughal dynasty. Now here we see that on the eve of Babur's invasion to India, that was in 1526, India was ruled by a breakaway kingdoms. What does this breakaway kingdoms means? That there was one particular you can say dynasty ruling over it. When it went down, so there were numerous smaller generals and leaders. They took over their territories and became their own rulers over there. So there were no particular big dynasties in India, even in around Delhi and so all these regions were ruled over by smaller kings in their own smaller territories. So when Babur came over here, Delhi Sultanate had no particular powerful central authority, and it was Bengal, Jaunpur, Gujarat, Malwa, Mewar. They have all become independent because the main ruler, main dynasty had broken down into pieces. These states were also fighting against one another for their might, for the show of their power, and as they were fighting against another, with the result the sense of insecurity and tension reigned supreme throughout the country. Nobody knew who might attack them and they might lose their power, and that is why every particular, you can say, province or the kingdom was insecure. After this, however, these regional kingdoms one by one came under the control of the Mughals, and that is how, combining and annexing all these territories into one Mughal under one Mughal empire, this Mughal empire gradually became one huge kingdom and one big dynasty. Now when we talk about the Mughal Empire, through where do we get information about this empire? That we are going to do under the heading of sources. So one of the most important source of the Mughal Empire, of the initial stages till the later stages, we can say till the time the king was there, is Ain-e-Akbari. Now this is a main source of information about the Mughals. It is not written by Akbar, so don't get confused. Ain-e-Akbari was written by Abul Fazl, and he was one among the 9 jewels of Akbar. So it was written during the reign of Akbar or during his kingship, but it was not written by him. It was rather written by his laureate, a 9 jewel, one out of 9 jewel, and that was Abul Fazl. It is a part of a large project of history writing commissioned by Akbar. So Akbar had commissioned a large number of people and laureates to write about the history during his time or till his time, and that was a part of it was written by Abul Fazl, which was in Ain-e-Akbari. It is regarded as precious source material for this particular history. Why? Because it tells us about the administration and the culture during the reign of Akbar, and by that time it was a very set and proper dynasty of the Mughals. So it talks a lot about Mughals as well as especially Akbar, who is one of the greatest Mughal ruler, and you can even term him as one of the biggest and the greatest ruler of India as well. Now this Ain-e-Akbari, as we know, it is a part of a huge commission. Still we can say that this itself is divided into 5 different books. The first book deals with the imperial household of the Mughal dynasty. Second book deals with the servants of the emperors and the military and the civil services. So you can note them down somewhere in your copies or in your book itself as points. First is about the royal household, second about the servants and the military and the civil servants. Third book deals about the administration. The imperial administration means how the administration was done by the king and his generals, and it consists of regulations for the judicial and executive departments. Then we talk about the fourth book. The fourth book contains information about Hindu philosophy, science, social customs and religion. So although they were Muslims, they were Mughals, but this fourth book talks about the Hindu philosophy and science and proper knowledge about them. Then lastly, we talk about the fifth book, which contains the wise sayings of Akbar. Remember, Akbar was not properly educated, but still we can say he was under the influence of a lot of people around him, the laureates, the learned people, and that is why through that he was one of the very knowledgeable or an experienced or a seasoned man. And so his sayings, wise sayings, are also termed over here, written over here in the fifth part of Ain-e-Akbari, the fifth book. It talks about the important, you can say, teachings that are given by Akbar. This also contains an amount of the ancestry and biography of author, that is Abul Fazl. His particular you can say genealogy is also mentioned about his particular ancestry and biography. That is also mentioned in this book, known as Ain-e-Akbari. So it tells a lot about the culture, the time period, the era, even before Akbar's reign and during the Akbar's reign. So that is why it is a, you can say, a lot of history and historical facts are mentioned through this particular book. And as it's a part, it's a 5 books series, so you can very well understand how much information it can impart and it can give to the readers. Next we see the monuments. When we talk about the monuments and we talk about the Mughal Empire, the one and the most important monument that has been gifted to us by the Mughals is basically the Taj Mahal. Although Taj Mahal can be considered to be the most beautiful thing, but it is a tomb, and that is an important thing to keep in mind. Shah Jahan built Taj Mahal, and that was in memory of Mumtaz Mahal. It is the tomb where Mumtaz Mahal's dead body has been kept. It is Muslim. It is the mausoleum of both Mumtaz Mahal and Shah Jahan. Shah Jahan also, after his death, was buried over there. It is built on the banks of river Yamuna. It is in Agra, and it was designed by Ustad Isha Khan, and it is made up of pure white marble. Legends are that it took 22 years or 22 years to construct this thing. The main structure is constructed on a high platform, and each corner of this platform here is a minaret. That means there are 4 different minarets on different 4 corners. The central dome rises to a height of 56.1 meters. That means you can understand the height by multiplying it into 3, and you will get the height in feet. So that is 1 meter equals to almost 3 feet. So you can very well understand that 50 into 3 means 150 feet and even more. It can obviously go to 155, 160 feet height of the central part, that is the dome structure. The interior has an octagonal chamber. Octagonal means it has 8 different sides. The marble dome in the center looks like an inverted lotus. So inside, if you see, it looks like a lotus which is upside down. And the actual graves are in the lower chamber. That means if you go to Taj Mahal, you will never be able to see them at the first sight. They are underground. They are not visible in front of everyone as soon as you enter the Taj Mahal. Besides that, the entire structure is made of marble. Walls are decorated with floral prints, designs, and even semi-precious stones are put up over there. There were many precious stones were put up there, but it is considered that they were taken away. But still, we can say a lot of stones are there. This method of decoration is called Petra Dura. Petra Dura is one of the ways how precious stones are put up over there in the walls, so that they form a part of a design which is made of on them of flowers and things. The Taj Mahal brought together the architectural forms developed by the Mughals, like the massive domes of marbles, Petra Dura, inlay work, and kiosks. Kiosks means chhatris. So these are all the various different ways the you can say Mughal buildings were built, and this was basically, all these things are obviously clearly visible in the, evidently seen in the Taj Mahal. Besides that, another important thing, this was basically a tomb. When we talk about the mosques, there are many mosques. There is Pearl Mosque and there is Red Fort. But important thing is the Jama Masjid that we are talking about. It is the biggest one in the country. And here we see it was built by Shah Jahan. It is the biggest mosque in India till date. And its courtyard has the capacity of almost accommodating 1,000 people at one particular time. It is built on a lofty basement, and it has gateways on 3 different sides of the courtyard. So here we see it has 3 gateways, 4 towers, and 2 high minarets constructed of red sandstone and marble. Besides that, the face of its spacious prayer hall consists of 11 arcs, of which the central arc rises above the roof level. So even beyond the roof level, the arc rises, and that is one of the you can say differentiating feature which makes it stand apart and stand out from the all the different kinds of mosques. Yet it is one of the biggest and the most spacious mosque, and till date a lot of azans and a lot of worship ceremonies are done over there. Next we see the Red Fort in Delhi. Red Fort in Delhi is basically the, you can say, important building symbol of our country itself. Every time on 15th August, the leader, the Prime Minister, reads out his message from there. So here we see Red Fort was built by Shah Jahan after he decided to shift his capital to Delhi. So it is located on the banks of river Yamuna, and it is made up of complete red sandstone and marble. The fort has massive walls and two gateways. These two gateways are basically termed as the western gate, known as the Lahori gate. This gate was supposed to be used for emperor's ceremonial purposes. Whereas among the many impressive buildings inside the Red Fort are, you can say, Diwan-e-Aam and Diwan-e-Khas. Diwan-e-Aam was basically a place where king would listen to all the general people and their problems, and Diwan-e-Khas is basically a place where king would listen to all the people, those who are the important designatories, his ministers, the important people like a cabinet. So it was Diwan-e-Khas is for those where decisions were taken about the kingdom and all those things. It was like a place where meetings were held by the cabinet or the core group. Whereas Diwan-e-Aam, anyone could come over there with their problems, and the king would have that darbar, and he would listen to all the problems and then try to find out the solutions or problems, how to tackle them. He would take out all the decisions. So here we say these are basically the structures: Jama Masjid, Red Fort, Taj Mahal. We have done about the important Qila, we have done about the important mosque, we have done about the important tomb. So these are the three different ways of showing the era of the Mughals, and so they talk about a difference in the different eras also, and altogether how Mughal dynasty was different from all the other dynasties which came earlier to them. Obviously after Mughals there were no other dynasties but the British which came to India. That we'll do in the next class, but here we are talking about the Mughals and the previous, how they are different we can understand through these particular books as well as the monuments. Here we move on to the first king now, that is under the Mughal dynasty. The one who was the ruler who established it was known as Babur. Now Babur's full name was Zahir-ud-Din Muhammad Babur. Remember that carefully, Zahir-ud-Din Muhammad Babur, and he was a descendant of Timur, 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 and this Timur was a Mongol. So from Mongols this particular, you can say, dynasty started. From Mongols, Timur, there was this his son Babur, and they were basically those who came and rampaged the area, won it, and they used to move ahead, Timur. But later onwards Babur came to India, he defeated the kings, and then he settled over there, establishing his own empire, and gradually this became into a big dynasty over here and ruled for almost 200 to 300 years. It was at Kabul he carved out a small principality for himself. Having established himself at Kabul, Babur turned his eyes towards India. Kabul is basically Afghanistan. So there he had a small place of rule for himself, and after that he went towards India because he had his eyes on India, as India was the golden bird. So it was something which was always, you can say, enchantment and a very tempting place for most of the warriors to come and invade India. So he had his eyes on India. So at that time the Lodi dynasty was ruling over India, and among the Lodi dynasty it was Ibrahim Lodi had occupied Delhi, but Daulat Khan Lodi, the governor of Punjab, invited Babur to come towards India and oust Ibrahim Lodi. That means to remove Ibrahim Lodi and defeat him and get him out of the throne. In the first battle of Panipat that was fought in 1526, Babur defeated Ibrahim Lodi, and then he occupied Delhi and Agra. Babur had to wage two other wars, that was one against Rana Sanga of Mewar, and the other was against the eastern Afghans, because before he could have a proper his rule established in Delhi. So he defeated Ibrahim Lodi, then he defeated Rana Sanga, then he defeated the Afghans, and finally he got the area under his control. The Battle of Khanwa that was fought the very next year in 1527 was fiercely fought between Babur and Rana Sanga's forces, where Rana Sanga was defeated. So the Battle of Khanwa was the battle through which Babur had a proper firm position in the Delhi and the Agra region. And it was in 1529 Babur met the combined forces of Khans and Nusrat Shah of Bengal. This was a battle known as Battle of Ghagra. And Battle of Ghagra, Afghans and that Bengal's Shah, they combined forces, fought with the force of you can say Babur, but still they could not withstand and they were defeated. And that is how Babur crossed the river and compelled the Bengal and the Afghan armies to go away. However, he could not win a decisive victory, but before his death, he had a huge empire, almost a big territory under his rule by now. And in 1530, even before he could stabilize the Mughal Empire, he was killed or he died. Now at this time when he came over here, his son was Akbar. He was not very young, not very old, and he was quite a young boy at that time when his father had gone away, and there was no particular legal heir to the throne except for he himself. But he was a minor at that time, so he still had to leave his education and everything, and he had to get into the administration of the empire of the dynasty. And he has one of his general, Bairam Khan, tutor, who was supposed to look after his all the things, making him learn the warfare skills, everything. So we move on to the next king, and that is Akbar. Now he was the greatest of the Mughal rulers of India. He was only 13 years of age when he was supposed to take over the throne, and he was guided by his tutor, who is Bairam Khan. Now Akbar succeeded to a difficult position and had to virtually reconquer his empire, because now everybody thought that you can say very ferocious king Babur has died, so it is very evident that now there is no one to look after the empire. His son is very young, so we can once again go and claim our control over the empire, the dynasty, or the Mughal Sultanate. So at that time Akbar had to reclaim it, means he had to fight all these particular oppositions, so that once and for all these enemies could be retreated, could be defeated, and could be sent away, and they could have a control over their empire as for a longer period of time. So the Afghans were regrouping their forces under the leadership of Hemu. You have to remember the name. Hemu, the Wazir of Adil Shah, for a final showdown with the Mughals. And it happened in the second battle of Panipat. The Mughal forces were led by Bairam Khan, and they defeated Hemu. So once again Mughals won the battle and the Afghans were defeated. After having established himself in Delhi and Agra, Akbar captured Malwa, Gondwana, Bengal, Gujarat, Kashmir and Kabul. So it was the young fellow turned out to be one of the best kings of not only of that era but of all time in India, and he made that huge empire into a very big kingdom and conquered various different places in nearly all the different directions, not only reclaiming his empire but even extending to its full bloom. He ventured beyond the Vindhyas in Deccan, and after a stiff resistance defeated many local rulers even in the Deccan and the southern part of the region. Finally, Ahmednagar, Berar, Khandesh were annexed to the Mughal Empire. He also subdued the Rajput princes, and except only for Mewar. Now we see, as we talk about various battles, the famous battle of Haldighati was fought in 1576 between Maharana Pratap and the ruler of Mewar and the Mughal army. So Maharana Pratap was someone who was matchless in courage, and he fought very bravely, but he had to escape from the battlefield when he was heavily wounded. Later onwards, that area was also taken by the Mughals, and after that we can say somewhere in 1605 Akbar also died. But by the time Akbar died, his authority had extended from Assam in the east to all the you can say areas beyond the northwest frontier, that is today's Pakistan Afghanistan region. Besides that, Kabul, Kandahar in the west, that is Kabul, Kandahar are in Afghanistan. In the Deccan, his dominion included Ahmednagar, Khandesh, and Berar. The kingdoms of Multan, Sindh, Gujarat, Kashmir, Bengal ceased to exist. So, from Bengal to Kashmir to Deccan and all the regions, you can say major part of the Indian subcontinent was all brought under the control of the you can say Akbar or the Mughal dynasty. And that is how we can say the young fellow whom all the enemies eyed as an easy target to defeat and reclaim the Mughal dynasty under their control turned out to be the one who ruled the massive or the biggest area of the empire. And it was all self-made. He did not get it in heritage. He had to reclaim even the empire that was given to him, and then onwards he went on extending the empire and extended it to such great heights that he became one of the only rulers at that time to rule over such a big vast entire Indian subcontinent region. So that is how we see he turned out to be the ferocious, not only the wise king, but a very good administrator and a warrior, and one who turned out to be a very genial king, a very kind king. Later onwards we'll see his policies, the Rajput policies and the policies in regards to social and educational reforms, and then we'll come to know more about Akbar. So in this module we'll just talk about the introduction, sources of Delhi Sultanate, Babur, and a little introduction about Akbar. Rest we'll do in the next module, that is all about his policies and his reforms that he started, and then we move on forward to in the chapter with the other king, that is Aurangzeb. But for today we'll end up over here. I hope you must have understood it. You can even go through the books and go through the chapter once again for better understanding. With this we come to the end. Thank you.